Hi everybody and welcome to week 3 of Introduction to Research. So this week we are looking at this module here, module 2, Fundamentals of Research. So this is really theory and conceptually heavy week, and I wanted to try and break it down a little bit for you to show you the important bits and to try and translate it into English really. So we refer to the Picard text, and I'm just going to jump through to the next page. This is, pardon me, the chapter that you need to look at this week. And this refers largely in part to a table on page 7, table 1.1. So that is, I'm just going to drag it over so you can see it. That is this table. Oh, hang on a tick, I'll just get that going again. This is the table I wanted to talk to you about. So this talks about the 3 main research paradigms. Now, we talk about research paradigms. What we really just mean is 3 different ways of approaching research. So a paradigm is just like a way of thinking or a way of approaching an issue, in this case, research. The 3 here, we've got positivism, post-positivism, and interpretivism. Now, when you read the textbook, you might come up feeling like you really don't understand any of it at all, and that's how I felt when I read it through the first time. So what I thought I would do is to take this table, which is actually really good, and try and translate it into English for you. So I've put together a PowerPoint presentation, as you do, and let's get this going so I can talk you through what each of them means. I'm just trying to work out how to get it started. There we go. Oh, that's a really wonky view. Hang on a tick. Okay, still a slightly wonky view, but this is an improvement. Okay, so this is, I'll give you 3 slides, you can see them here, and they each look at one of those 3 paradigms, and my attempt to translate them into English. Okay, first, positivism. This is the idea that there is a reality, and that reality is independent of any variables or any factors or any stuff that goes on around that reality. That there is one reality, and we can go out there and we can find what that is by doing some research. So that reality exists independent of other factors. There's no relationship between the researcher and that which is being researched. So the researcher sees themselves as completely outside the research process, or not the research process, but outside the thing that they're researching. They don't feel they have an influence on what they're going to find. They're just out there to go and get some data and tell a story with that data. We do things like we test hypotheses. So this is sort of really common in some of the hard sciences where they say, you know, if the world's temperature rises by 0.2 of a degree over a 6-month period, what will be the outcome on this particular plant? So they can test it. The hypothesis is if I raise the temperature of the air around this tree, it'll die within 2 weeks. And they'll go out and they'll do exactly that, put the temperature up, have a look at the tree. They killed it, yes. They didn't kill it, no. Very simple testing of a hypothesis. Got an idea, test it, see what happens. Get the reality of what happens after you try it out. So looking at quantitative data, so that's numbers. So they might be saying, okay, if we raise the temperature by 2, then the lifespan of the tree decreases by 3 days. So lots of numbers. Lots of variables. They might say, okay, let's test it again. Let's put the temperature up by 3 degrees. And this time, if you put that up by 3, then the lifespan drops by another 0.5. So all these numbers and variables, and they can graph it and do all this cool stuff with lots of numbers that tells heaps and heaps of stories. You can also do it in library type research. And I've got an example here of a positivist approach to a library question. So you might be sitting in your public library saying, I wonder what happens if we want to open our libraries longer at night. We might say, you know, maybe a couple of days a week we might want to have a later. Let's see what happens if we try it. So the research question is, what happens if we open the library longer in an evening on a weeknight? So they've got the hypothesis there, which might be, say, I reckon if we open our library for 1 extra hour on a Friday night, there will be more people in there. The people will stay for that final hour. They won't all leave when they're used to leaving. They'll stay there for that final hour. Let's test it. Let's open the library up for an extra hour on a Friday night and see what happens. That's the method. And what you'd get is a bunch of numbers. So you'd say, okay, last week we closed at 5 o'clock and there were 30 people in the library that we had to kick out at 5 o'clock. Our hypothesis is if we stay open for an extra hour on the Friday night, there'll still be 30 people there because people will actually want to hang out there for that extra hour. So you test it. You open up for another hour on a Friday night and then you count and you get another number, which might be 30. If your hypothesis is correct, that people actually do want to stay longer on a Friday night, then there'll still be 30 people there and you'll have proved your point. Or you might say, okay, well, there's only 2 people left for that extra, at the end of that extra hour. There was only 2 people in the whole library. So that proves that people don't want us to open later on a Friday night. So you use that data to tell the story, to test your hypothesis and make the findings from that. That's positivism. And you can see the research is not really involved with the people there that are experiencing this thing about the extra hour. They're just there to count. They're not talking to the library patrons. They're not investigating which night of the week is better. They're just getting in there, making a guess about what might happen, counting the number of people, and they can be completely independent of the people themselves. They've still got a story to tell by the data that they're putting together. That's positivism. Okay, next one. Post-positivism. I don't know why it's called that. I think there is a theory about how one evolved from the other. But anyway, that's not important. This is still a realistic approach. There's still going to be a truth. People want to stay on Friday or people don't want to stay on Friday. But there's something, a realistic, more a slightly realistic approach there saying, well, they might stay on Friday because the restaurant down the road doesn't open until 6. There might be a reason why they're staying later on Friday, or they're not staying later on Friday. They might not stay later on Friday because the last train goes at 5 o'clock and so everyone has to clear out by then to catch the train home. So recognising that there might be variables here, that there might be a bit more to the story than just yes or no, they want to stay or they don't want to stay. So we can never be really sure of what that reality is because, there are so many imperfections and variables and factors that influence the way people work. So the researcher, again, is just an external observer. They're out there counting how many people are there in that last hour. But then they're taking that data and thinking, okay, well, we got down to, there's only 10 people left. So there could be something else going on here. Maybe we need to think about why those 10 people left and there wasn't still the same number were there at 5 o'clock that there were for 6. How come we lost people in that last hour? Is that because people don't want us open? Or is it because of something else like the train left or the restaurant opened or whatever? So recognising that there might be something else going on and thinking about other bits of data that they could use to verify their hypothesis. So the hypothesis might end up being that people stay till 5:30 and then leave. And the reason for that is, and then they go and look for some extra data to try and work out what that reason might be. And it might be because the last train left. There might be something else that explains that story. Okay, so testing the hypothesis, but some consideration of context is required. You get quantitative and qualitative data. So this is an interesting one. This is mixed methods because you can use both bits of data, quantitative, so lots of numbers, and qualitative, which is people's comments and things. So what you might do is you have the same research question. So this is a library example. What happens when we open the library longer on weeknights? Still the same question. The hypothesis is still the same as the positivist approach. If we open longer on weeknights, people will stay for that extra time until we get to closing time. And then the method changes though. So you might do exactly the same thing for the first step. Open an hour later on Tuesday or Friday or whatever, count how many people are there for that last hour. But then you might think, well, maybe it's going to be different on a different day. Maybe Friday night's not a really good example because everyone wants to knock off for the week and go home and go out with their family. So maybe we should do this on a Tuesday night, or maybe we should do it on a Wednesday night, or maybe we should do it over a period of a month and then compare. So we're not just saying, this is what happened on this night, this is the reality. We can say, this is what happened on this night, this is what happened on this night, and this is what happened on this night. So together these things start telling us a bit more of a story. And you might talk to some people and say, why did you leave early? Why did you go early? And that way you're getting a bit of that quantitative data in there as well, about people's comments about things. So you can see it's much more of a relaxed, less scientific in a way, or less sort of black and white, I suppose, about this is the truth and this is what we found and therefore that's the reality. So that's a sort of more relaxed approach, I guess. Then you get into this final guy, the interpretivists. Now this is where I feel comfortable. This is where the researcher is really part of the research. You're not interested in a truth. You're recognising that there are millions of truths and that everyone's reality is their reality, but it's going to be different from everyone else's reality. So it's recognising that there are as many realities as there are people experiencing them, because my reality of staying in the library for an extra hour is going to be completely different to your reality of staying in the library for an extra hour, because you'll have different motivations, different outcomes, different thinking, and a different experience of being there for that extra hour. So in this sort of interpretivist research, the researchers are in there with the participants. They're asking them questions, they're sitting them down, they're talking to them, they're doing interviews, they are exploring their experiences by talking to them. So we're looking now at qualitative data. Now, you might have a little bit of quantitative data in there. You might say, okay, there was an extra, 10 people stayed for the extra hour. Of those, 5 of them said they stayed for the extra hour because they were comfy and they were happy to stay. 2 of them said they stayed for the extra hour because they had planned to do so because they'd read that the opening hours were going to be extended and they were meeting someone after being at the library for dinner. So it was helpful for them to have somewhere to wait. So you're mixing up the whole numbers with the reasons why people do stuff the way they do. So this is the whole idea here. Exactly the same research question. What happens when we open the library longer on the weekend, on weeknights? There's no hypothesis though, because you're not trying to prove something. You're not trying to, you haven't got a set idea in your mind about what something, how something is, or what a reality is. There's no set view about this is what I'm trying to prove. We're not interested in trying to prove anything. We're interested in trying to understand people's experiences. And we do that by talking to them. It's pretty straightforward and a more social sciencey sort of flavour, I suppose, than a sciencey one. I think that's probably fair to say. And the method we do is we talk to people. So we sit down with them, we say, hey, I noticed you're here for the extra hour. Could you tell me a bit about why you chose to stay that extra hour? What's it been like for you being here for the extra hour? Is there any positives from being here, any negatives from being here? Do you think you'll come back here again for the extra hour? What could we do to make it even more useful for you to be open for an extra hour? Would another night in the week be useful? Or is this the best night to be open for an extra hour? So all that investigative talk and exploration of people's experience, that's what interpretivism is all about. So I hope that helps explain those 3 different approaches: positivist, post-positivist, and interpretivist. And of course, you can choose any of those depending on what it is you want to find out. If you've got a hypothesis to test, then you're pretty good with positivism. Go for it. If you have got a hypothesis to test but you recognise that there might be some variables and context that might affect the outcome, then perhaps post-positivism is what you want to start putting yourself into. If you're interested in people's experiences and you want to understand what someone's experience is like or someone's reality is, then you're starting to look at interpretivist approach. And of course, each of those different approaches have different methods, different data that comes out of them, and a whole different way of answering a question, even though the question can be exactly the same. So I hope this has helped, and if you look at this and read the textbook together, hopefully you'll come up with a really good understanding of these 3 approaches. Thanks.